Running Sentences presents Wasteland City, A Tale of Lost Memories. Part 7. Headed Home. The slow journey back to Wasteland City begins, but many mysteries remain unsolved. This is a work of fiction. All of the names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidences in this book are a product of the author's imagination and are used in a fictitiously silly manner. Any resemblance to actual people, living or dead, or actual events is of pure coincidence. Copyright 2021, Michael Honnery. All rights reserved. Mustang raised an eyebrow at Focke-Wulf, who stood there grinning madly at him. "Well, easy or hard, Mustang? What do either of those things entail?" The sun shifted, and the shade that had been lacking from the tree returned to cool off Mustang in this wasteland where only one tree stood. He once again tried to get up, this time not relying on his arms but pushed up with his feet and using his back against the tree to get up. You headed back to civilization is the easy way. How, Focke-Wulf, does that mean an easy way or a hard way? Well, Mustang, since you insist, I can either knock you out and take you back, unconscious and not feeling anything, or you can do that awake and in pain, because you look like you are in quite a bit of pain. Awake, please. I have some questions, and you need to answer them. Pity, I was hoping for a quiet ride. Well, get aboard a horse, and we'll get going. Mustang, now fully standing up thanks to the tree, limped his way over towards the horses, though he kept a careful eye on Focke-Wulf to make sure the man did nothing funny. Surprisingly, he didn't, and even helped Mustang get up onto the horse, and then got up onto his own. With all of this accomplished, the man then grabbed the lead of Mustang's horse, and they set off down the path towards Barrier City. They'd made their way back to the road and spent the rest of their afternoon in silence as they rode. Mustang hadn't intended for the quiet ride to happen. He had questions, but for some reason none of them seemed to come out in this sweltering heat. They passed the water bottle back and forth between them as the sun lazily passed the day moving through the sky, until it dipped enough to cool off and darkening, welcoming the evening night sky. "You have been quiet, Mustang. I thought you had questions." "Yes, but it was rather exhausting to ask them all in that sun." "Fair enough. I suppose I should explain what's happened anyway. I was approached by the private investigator, Fraud Dunning, our dear friend and former colleague at Wasteland, and he told me that he'd been hired by a person who wanted me to arrange some stuff and deliver money plus a letter to two worthwhile workers. It was an unusual job, but a job is a job, and it was probably some final estate matters into spreading money out or something, and I didn't really ask any questions, and it was a sealed situation." "You didn't question it?" "Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I have mouths to feed and pay, so if a no-nonsense job comes up and the pay is a decent amount, you do it, right?" "Yeah, I guess so, Focke-Wulf, but still, you question it." "So I did all of that, and I questioned it, but I did the job, and then this whole Corsair incident happens. I have a man approaching me, saying that he is Corsair, and that he is searching for a man who is pretending to be him in Wasteland City. Now, I don't buy this, but I took the job. Figured I'd send my fellow co-workers out to research this man while I worked the case. It didn't take long to unveil the connection and drugs and Augustina mugging the grand criminal." "So you were working for her without working for her? That's your excuse for what happens? For what has happened all about, and not even just at the train station?" "Not my excuse, but giving you an idea of the situation, which is complicated. And I sort of jumped on the train without thinking about it, and when she started shooting, it wasn't my fault. And now you're here leading me to a doomed city." "Well, I don't know about that part. That appears Augustina gave it a good try. It will probably leap back into being a successful barrier city, but years in the future if it is to have a chance to do so. And what happened to the criminal herself? Brandished her gun at me, and when we got back to barrier itself, disappeared, which means we will have to be on the lookout. And that's why you're now helping me, despite the fact that neither of us trust one another. Yes, it's something like that. The two fell into silence as their horses continued to take them down the road, not needing much direction. The city of Barrier had begun to loom in the distance. The horses led them to the gate of the city, which was well lit and now guarded by townspeople who looked unhappy to see anyone approaching their new post. Mustang and Fockwolf left their horses lead them directly up to the guards and crowd the road to stop them, and so they came to a stop. I'll state your business? Well, I'm seeking medical attention. Transporting an idiot to Mare Natalie, and that's Mustang and I'm Fockwolf. It was obvious that they'd been given orders to stand there and not expect anyone or let anyone through. Unfortunately, someone had shown up, and now they didn't know what it was that they were to do. A ripple of conversation wandered among the 6 or so guards, and even a quick game of Rochambeau, before one lost and scurried into the city itself. The rest returned to face them. You wait here until we get word on what to do. Mustang and Fockwolf both looked at one another, then dismounted from the horses so that they could stretch and sit on something that was a bit more comfortable, namely the ground. The guard who'd gone into town found himself in front of the door to the mayor's apartment. He was furiously banging on it, hoping that she would open it, though the banging lessened as fear for reprisals for waking up the mayor began to set upon the guard who was just doing his job. When the door violently opened, he flinched and stepped back. Mayor, what is it? You, remember that, you told us to guard that, gate, the one that, no one, uses? Well, the thing is, people showed up. So what? Turn them away. One of them said he's bringing you an idiot. I don't want an idiot. Why would I want an idiot? What was the name of the idiot trying to give me an idiot? I forgot. And, I may have left before they told them, before they said anything about that. Oh, never mind. I shall go to these people and see what it is that they want. Give me a few minutes. With that, she slammed the door shut in his face. Natalie was scurrying along behind the guard who'd fetched her, the empty road clattering with their footsteps as they headed for the gate. She was lost in thought and barely heard the babbling of the guards trying to say something and give some reason for his calling her out this evening. There was one guy who'd been hanging around when you were ordering the city to close off. You know, that tall, dark guy with a strange name that sounds weird but rolls off the tongue. She semi-heard what he'd said and stored it away in her mind as she thought more about who could want to see her. There was, however, no answer that came, and the two soon found themselves closing in on the gate. Upon arriving and pushing past the guards who stood in the way, Natalie stared at Mustang, who was now lying on the ground asleep, and Fockwolf, who was in a similar but not quite same state of sleepiness. She sighed to herself and then turned to her people, who shuffled about from foot to foot. It was an attempt to shift blame away from themselves, and she could only shake her head. It was partly her fault but still, the least they could have done was find a house and keep these people there until the morning. Right, take these two, find a house, put them up for the night. I'll see them in the morning. Should anyone else come along, just throw them in the same house and put a guard on it. Good night. She hurried off the way she'd come, leaving the guards to once again throw together a random game of Rochambeau, all to see who would now have the unlucky task of taking care of the new prisoners. It took a minute for the unlucky lot of 3 to get picked, and then head over to grab the sleeping figures and carry them off. Mustang awoke with a start and a rather nasty jabbing pain in his side as he rose from the bed. He looked around to see a rather surprised doctor by his side who had a scalpel primed and ready to do its work. The doctor sat next to him on a chair by the bed with the scalpel, thankfully well away from him but close enough to be at hand. I suspect you felt me probing about to clean the wound, and that woke you. If you lie down again, I shall finish the job. The doctor, however, just calmly pushed him back down onto the bed, and came up with a gag for him to bite down on, which was then found its way into Mustang's mouth, and after doing so, he felt his jaw clench as a few stars popped up into his vision, as there was more probing going on with his wound. After a few minutes, and a bit worse for wear, Mustang came out of the bedroom into a drawing room of sorts. It had been finely furnished with plenty of books, only it had been left and abandoned to just sit there and rot by the former inhabitants of this little house. The only figure here was Focke-Wulf, who was buried in some story he was reading. The book snapped shut and Mustang wandered in. Good, you're alive, and mostly, well, kind of. You don't look that well. We have a meeting, though. You stayed. Yes, though when I did try to leave, the anxious guards prevented us from entering the city, seemed just as anxious to keep us here in this house. With a shake of his head, Mustang turned and headed back out the door he'd come in. Focke-Wulf, who threw his book to the side, was already up and out of his chair, hurrying across the room to join him. The two emerged from the house a few minutes later, surrounded by some awkward-looking guards who had their guns at the ready but didn't look like they wanted to use them. A crowd had gathered to gawp at the strangers who had been arrested trying to enter the city. How the word had spread, no one would say for certain, but everyone knew it was the guards, as who else could it be? Mustang stopped for a second when he spotted Moneypenny and Alex in the middle of the road. He gave a short wave, and then followed the guards as they headed down the road. A few words were ringing in his ears from his two friends. "Mustang, what have you done now?" "Oh, it's all pretty obvious, Moneypenny. He's gone and gotten himself arrested. It's pretty obvious. I mean, we can see what we can see." The two had been marched up the road some 2,000 or so feet before they'd been brought to a stop in front of a house. One of the lead guards had gone up to the door and entered. The group, however, was forced to stand outside for a minute and wait around while this lead guard returned. The crowd, however, seemed to be bored that nothing was happening and began pushing at the guards, who were pushing back. Moneypenny had tried to get closer, and Mustang could hear her yelling something, but couldn't make it out. And it didn't seem to matter, as the guards, having had enough of this, rushed the two of them inside the building, also that they wouldn't be pushed around anymore. Natalie was shuffling through her paperwork in what had quickly been decided as a meeting room in this house. It had a large table and a stack of papers, and her exasperated self sitting behind it while her secretary was off to her side. She was desperately looking about for a piece of paper that had vanished, despite her putting it down right in front of herself. She figured it had to be the secretary, but she couldn't blame her secretary, because the man was across the room to the side reading something else. Though, with no one else to blame other than herself, she put the blame firmly on said secretary. A knock on the door interrupted, and she was thankful for a second as the door opened and Mustang and Focke-Wulf were hurried inside by the guards. To this, her face fell. "Oh yes, the prisoners. That sounds ominous. Is there a problem, Miss Mayor? That's what I've been told. You're the mayor of this city now?" "Yes and no, there is a problem. As with everything, this situation is in a bad spot, a sort of muddled gray nothingness that just can't be called white or black, or it's a mess. But you helped us out. You have also been accused of helping our enemy, Miss Mugging, escape." That was not my fault. This guy, on the other hand," Mustang firmly pointed towards Focke-Wulf. "I protest, I did nothing of the sort. She pointed a gun at me as well, and, I did sort of jump on the train, but I did that out of just reaction. Gentlemen, I do not care. From here on out, you two and your collection of oddball friends who came with you, aside from Fraud, who has protested being called your friend when I talked to him, you two and your friends are banned from the city, from Barrier City. Go away and don't come back without writing first or getting permission from many people. She looked rather set and angry and was on the verge of sitting up from her chair, but sat back and waved both hands at them to get them to go away. And so they turned and left quietly back the way they came in. With a sigh, Natalie was happy that she'd achieved something, and then turned to look for her paper, which she had just lost, and desperately began the search for it. As Focke-Wulf stepped out of the house, followed by Mustang, he shielded his eyes from the harsh sun and looked about for the crowd. The group of people, however, had vanished to his disappointment. He seemed to want to see if any of them needed a private detective of some sort. However, Alex and Moneypenny were there, though neither of them liked him very much, so he started heading off down the road to avoid them. Mustang stopped at his friends. "We have to leave. The mayor's kicking us out." He then turned and headed down the road after Focke-Wulf. This left Moneypenny and Alex stunned for a second. "You got us kicked out of town?" "Wasn't my fault." He continued his hurried way down the road, not bothering to turn to talk to them. Alex, at first, hurried after him, then stopped when she realized that Moneypenny was still lost in a daze in being kicked out of town. She hurried back, grabbed the woman's arm, and then headed after Mustang once again. The crew had managed to gather in the now more or less empty hall of the train station lobby. They were waiting for the mournful whistle of the train to announce that it was arriving. The only person missing was Corsair, who Mustang hadn't seen since he'd left the man mourning over the body of the woman, the one who was supposed to be his mother. At least that's what everyone was saying. The whole train of thoughts rumbled back into his mind after a night's absence, and started to feel like a headache of sort was coming on from thinking about it. A lone whistle blasted its way through all of that as the train announced that it was arriving. The four of them, Mustang, Alex, Moneypenny, and Focke-Wulf, began picking up their luggage and heading towards the platform. As they vanished towards the platform, Corsair entered the station carrying a bag and hurrying towards them. The train was pulling into the station, puffing its usual smoke and causing everyone to lose sight of what was going on. Then, as the final people who'd come in on the train got off, the group began to get onward, with Mustang being the last one to board, looking around before he did. The steam had drifted to block the sight lines of the rest of the station, and with a sigh, Mustang clambered aboard and entered the train. The group had settled into some seats on the train car when the door burst open, and Corsair, with his suitcase, rushed in. He looked wildly about the place to make sure that he was in the right room, and when he spotted Mustang, Alex and Moneypenny nodded furiously. I'm here! Everyone sort of stared at Corsair, unsure of what to make of the situation. He was indeed on the train car, and there in the moment. "Why are you here? Didn't the mayor say she'd let you stay in the rich section of town while sorting matters out? Or did she change her mind?" "Nope, I simply cannot stay here for the life of me. It's too... morbid?" Corsair looked over at Alex, who had said it, and she had cocked her head to the side and mouthed it again. "Something like that? Or maybe not that. But is it okay if I stick around with you for a while, Mustang?" Yes. Moneypenny got up from her seat. "That's his way of saying yes, and if he doesn't say yes, he can move out of his little safe spot above my bookstore." "Don't speak for me." "Then move out. You've created a massive mess and left 2 cities damaged because of it." "Fine, I'll let him stay. Why are you so... But she had turned and sat down again and looked away. He turned and stared out the window of the train and crossed his arm with a frustrated look. Moneypenny had replicated this posture, only staring out the other side. The two seemed to have some unspoken situation. So is it okay if I stay with you, Mustang, or... Yes, Mr. Corsair. Alex stood up and moved over towards him, and taking him by the arm to glide him over towards one of the bench seats. These two are just having their usual disagreements over things, and it will get sorted out eventually. For now, come take a seat and relax while we head for home. Corsair cast a few glances between the group and paused on Falkwolf, who was busy looking over letters and ignoring the idiotic others. He recognized the man, but did and said nothing as he moved to sit down next to Alex. He promised himself that he keeps thinking about that man since there was something scratching his mind about him. With a soft whistle, the train began to chug its way for the exit of the station. It was slowly gained speed as it headed towards the city exit and off towards Wasteland City, the billows of smoke coming out the top as it chugged its way along the track until a good steady speed could be reached and hauled its way across the grasslands. It made good speed and moved as fast as it could, although once it reached about 40 miles an hour it settled in on that and cruised down the tracks that it was set on. It took much of the night for the train to snake its way across the guided path towards Wasteland City. The trip was an uneventful one, as the group had all sort of sat around and not talked to one another, since there was nothing to say, and Mustang was still puzzling over what had happened and why things had happened the way they did. He couldn't get over Augustina mugging, and how she'd managed to not reveal anything whatsoever. He'd put together a few things, but it wasn't all that well put together in his mind, and he needed something to bounce it off of, but there was nobody willing to talk. The train arrived back in a flourish of steam and whistles, although it was very much softer and it seemed muted. All of the usual steam and puffs of white smoke as it made its way into the station seemed sedated. There were a few people paying attention to it. Mustang rose from his seat on the train as it screeched on its brakes, coming to a stop in the station. What steam was there was pillowing out a little bit, but covering just enough of the track. He wasn't waiting around for anyone as he headed for the door. As he stepped out of the train onto the platform, 2 police officers promptly stepped forward to put cuffs on his wrists. The steam began clearing, and Sheriff Ugly McGee emerged as it cleared, the rest of his friends having a similar fate as they came out of the train. "Mustang, you're under arrest, as are the rest of you, for reasons I have yet to dream up of. Take them to the station." Then, as a quiet fell over the platform, a loud hissing and then followed by a ticking sound made itself known. It sounded like it was coming from the engine, and when the engineers spilled out of that car looking frightened, everyone froze. It took only a few more seconds for everyone to start running as the ticking came to a stop. Mustang was almost at the doorway into the station lobby when the shrill ring of an alarm greeted him. Then heat, lots and lots of heat, rippling at his back. His feet no longer felt like they were touching the ground, and he was most definitely flying and directly towards a wall, which greeted him a mere few seconds later as he crunched into the brick wall that had a steel girder poking out of it for extra support. There was no accompanying pain that followed the hit, but rather a soft numbness that slid him into a restful sleep. What felt like a century had passed before his eyes opened to a bright sky above him. He tried to get up, but his entire body hurt and refused to respond. The sight of figures moving past and fleeing glimpses made him aware that things were happening, but he couldn't hear, except for the sharp ring that kept going on and on. Eventually, after a few minutes of lying there gathering himself and what energy he could muster up, he sat up, which gave him sight of the burning wreckage of the train station. It was a twisted mass of nothingness. Most of that, he figured, was from the steam boiler engine in the train exploding. He glanced about to see the wounded being ferried about on stretchers and being hurried about. Sheriff Ugly was also nearby and was leaning against the wall looking to be in some sort of pain. Their eyes met and they looked directly at one another, and McGee seemed to be saying something, but Mustang couldn't hear it. The sheriff's mouth was moving a mile a minute, but none of it was reaching him. A second later, the duo found themselves being rushed off towards a hospital cart to be carted away. They found themselves being pushed into this cart with several other people who'd been in the station. They were settled onto the bench seats that lined the sides as stretchers were stacked in the middle. Alex came in on one, though she was unconscious and much of her clothes badly burned and put on a stretcher. A single touch of a crispy remains of her clothes came away with a gentle touch as the hospital workers pushed her stretcher on board. Soon, though, the cart was being pulled away with a jerk as horses raced through the streets to the nearest hospital that was hopefully uncrowded with victims. Mustang kept his attention on Alex, wondering what had happened to his other friends, while ignoring the elbowing coming from Ugly. After a short while, the cart pulled up to the drab-looking building with doctors and nurses hurrying about to empty the contents of any carts that pulled up outside its doors. The cart carrying Mustang and company pulled up into this mayhem. The stretchers were pulled out first, and then followed by the walking wounded, who were then unloaded, with Ugly out first, followed by Mustang. Once out, they found themselves rushed through the flash of a harsh sunlight beating down on the building, and the whole thing was rather disorienting as the nurses guided him with forceful pushes to get him inside, all so that the cart that they were on could get out of the way and the next one could come in and do its job. There was at least a line of 4 or 5 more carts that seemed to want to come in. Mustang entered the hospital and promptly was sent towards the lobby, where a bunch of seats had been hastily arranged. He found himself sitting down and was once again next to Ugly, who had managed to get a hold of some paper and pencil. He elbowed Mustang again and handed over a note. Mustang read it. "Who is responsible for all of this?" He held out his hand for the pencil, which Ugly handed over. He did his best to write legibly, but with his only writing surface being his leg, it kind of all went to hell. It sort of went loopy and unorganized. "Augustina Muggett. She was responsible for the drugs coming into the city, the attempted murder and framing of Corsair Bonaparte, I believe, and I have to guess trying to kill an entire train station." He finished his scrawl that looked like it wanted to fall off the page, and handed it over to Ugly. The sheriff, of course, snatched the paper and pencil away, and quickly wrote something and handed it back. Mustang rolled his eyes, as he could already read the really large word written on it. Proof. He got the pencil back and thought for a minute before trying to put his thoughts down. "Not from me, no. You can contact Barrier City and they'll have some. My case closed and she was the one responsible for it." Before the sheriff could do anything more than give Mustang a dirty look as he read over his shoulder what was written, a nurse came by and collected Ugly, taking the cop away from him. Mustang sat back, relaxed, and with the piece of paper and pencil still in his hands, and sort of sat there, wondering what was going to happen to him. But he, too, was soon collected, and then whisked away. He, however, wasn't taken by this nurse that had collected him to an examination room, and instead found himself outside in the back alleyway behind the hospital. When he turned to head back in, the person who was pretending to be this nurse pushed him away from the door, having moved from guiding him in front to behind him. Surprised, Mustang stopped and stared at this male nurse, who pointed towards a carriage that had rushed up the alleyway and came to a clattering stop. Its door was thrown open. He looked between the nurse and the carriage and figured he'd best get on to the carriage as the nurse suddenly had a very large knife in his hands. The dimly lit interior of the carriage had a surprise for Mustang. It was empty, aside from him. When he moved to see if he could escape, the door slammed shut and the carriage took off down the road. The movement tossed him back into a seat and forced him to sit back. The speed at which they were moving made it a very unappealing thing to try and jump out of as he was being jostled about. He tried to settle in and wait for the ride to an end, but it was not seemingly coming to an end. And it took some time for an exhaustion to set in, as he found himself being rattled around and round and round, and everything just seemed to be too much for him, so he decided to lie down and sleep. The carriage, for its part, was briskly rushing about the roads, darting from the main road to the small side road, then back. Eventually, the ride had been long and dizzying enough so that the driver felt comfortable to slow down and then turn down a small side road. It was a dead-end road that came to an abrupt stop at a gate. The carriage carried on, heading straight for the gate, which opened when they got closer and then allowed them to disappear inside. The coming to a stop awoke Mustang from his slumber, as the stop caused him to tumble from the bench chair that he was laying on to the carriage floor. The sudden dumping brought him about while he was rubbing his eyes to get himself fully awake when the door was opened. He looked at it and then the barely lit area behind it. The whole thing had a grand sense of mystery to it, and being a private detective, well, even if it meant he was now in harm, how could he turn that down? He rose to his feet as best he could in the carriage, and seemed to be rocking with each movement, and hurriedly got out of there. Upon stumbling his way out, he found himself surrounded by people who looked like they came from the city under Wasteland. A long look made it obvious that they weren't there to harm him, but protect him. They all had weapons, and they were all facing outwards, like they were expecting some sort of attack, but that nothing was coming. They all were tensed up, and for some reason Mustang felt rather reassured that he was in decent hands. And he half expected Mugging to pop out and shoot at him, but as he crossed the horse carriage garage towards the door, nothing happened, even though the guards moved with him. When they emerged from the carriage garage, and he found himself in a green garden that looked out over a section of the lower city, his ears had finally stopped ringing, and he could hear, though it all seemed very quiet, as some birds took to chirping, which tuned him into the fact that there was noise coming around him that he could hear once again. And this distraction only lasted a few more minutes, as he spotted two chairs sitting there looking out over the city, one of which was occupied, and as Mustang approached Lucius turned around from his seat. "Ah, Mustang, so good to see you survive the mayhem that has befallen you." "Thank you, Lucius. What's with all of this?" "Oh, I'm protecting you, or should I say offering to protect you. But we need to come to an agreement, and I need information." "Are you protecting me from Miss Mugging?" "Yes, and from Ugly as well, I think. And there is another party who has become interested in you, but I don't know if that is to harm you or not. But, first, let's get some things sorted out." "Gee, lucky me. I have lots of friends for simply trying to help a guy out." "Yes, they are friendly friends, aren't they? But I can stop them, or at least waylay them until you can get away. Are you interested in my help?" "I'd have to think about it." There is no time to think. It's either that no or never, as people won't wait around. But they will if you get involved, Lucius. "Maybe they will wait around. You can have that risk if you wish, Mr. Mustang. A calculated chance that I can do for you what you need, as long as you tell me what I want to know and what I think I know." "Well, what do you want to know?" "All right, Mustang. Question that I wanted to ask you about this whole situation. I need it explained to me so that I can figure out how to stop it in case of anything else. From what I understand, this Corsair Bonaparte came to the city. Why?" "The birthday party, I believe. His mom was holding a birthday party in the city, though. Why there seems to be reliant on our friend, Miss Mugging. So she gets him to come to the city, right? And then offs him. Why?" The thing of it is, you know the story of Miss Mugging. When she was in another city, she went and she had a fiancé reportedly, and then this fiancé disappeared and then reappeared, and then this fiancé was arrested for impersonation. You think she was pulling the same trick? It makes some sense. Get rid of him, use the name to get what she wants, which I'm guessing was connections to get more drugs into the city. Can't really control the upper city and their needs and their connections. Do wish they would come through me, though, but I guess they're smart enough to realize that would be a bad idea. So she winds up eliminating, or she gets somebody to eliminate him. She hired Farquhar to hire people to get rid of Corsair, reportedly anyway. That's what Farquhar told me. Yes, but then she discovers that the job isn't done. How? Well, actually, that might be my fault. I posted a note in the upper city asking, if anybody knew about this young man, and the description brought her to my place, to Moneypenny's place. And then we went off, and that was it, really. I see. Very, very roundabout. Right, that's unfortunate. Now, Mustang, there's, of course, our situation, our deal, or not deal if you don't take it. Although I do suggest you take it, because it does seem that Mugging is on the loose, and she can do whatever she wishes. What would it cost me, Lucius? Yes, the other part of the situation. I do have something, but once again it is in the distance and not a current thing. Has to do with money and fake stuff that has been rumored to be about Wasteland. Now, I can't give you all of the details yet, as I don't have everything, but counterfeiting seems to be the way of this town lately. With drugs, other things which we won't get into because I don't have all of the information yet, and, well, just people. Look at Corsair Bonaparte. A fake, and then a fake of a fake and a fake. It was all rather confusing, but do you take it or not, Mustang? You're pretending to give me a choice. That is true. It was either going to be voluntary or you'd have to do my future job by force, with a gun at your head. Either way works for me, though, and your choice. Mustang shook his head and turned to head back into the carriage garage. As he was leaving, though, he threw up his middle finger and held it up to make sure that Lucius could see. I'll take that as a yes, and you'll do what I need. Good, I should be in touch soon, but it may be a month before things fall into a good place to send you after them. Toodles! Mustang disappeared into the carriage garage, with the doors of the garage that let the carriage out swinging open a second later. Then the carriage emerged slowly, as Mustang was still holding his hand out the window, pointed towards Lucius, but still with his middle finger in an upright position. To this, Lucius could only wave as the carriage drove off down the road. End of Part 7. End of the story of Wasteland City and the tale of lost memories. Thank you for listening.